Okay, all right. I see what the problem was. They were able to hear you, they couldn't hear me, so let me reiterate my statements. Um, okay, guys, we got that sorted out. There's always, little knobs and dials and switches and toggles and
Absolutely.
everything here when we were doing this. Because I don't have a producer. I have Doug Diamond. You know Doug Diamond from Diamond Media, who always teaches me how to set this up. He and I tested everything yesterday. So okay, so give me a thumbs up. You can hear me, little old Anthony Patch. All right. It's fun guessing what I'm saying to Alana. Yeah, isn't it? Dummy me didn't have the microphones flipped. Okay, so guys, just so you know, I cannot type into chat room today. Function of probably bringing Skype into the live stream. For whatever reason, I've refreshed YouTube live stream several times. I can see you, so go ahead and offer comments and questions in chat. Um, I just will not be able to respond by typing, but I'll respond verbally to your questions in the chat room. What we will be doing with Alana is to give her the floor. I will try not to interrupt unless she asks me a question. And we don't do ambush journalism here. Alana is a longtime friend, but we will allow time later on to take questions from the chat room. So we'll factor into our conversation a block of time at the end. So what I recommend is jot down your questions, hold them until I throw the door open and say, go for it, guys, with your questions. You know the drill, but this is the first time that we've had an actual guest on the live stream. And Alana, I had guests on my show in the other venue on a pretty regular basis, including yourself. And I've kind of restricted that because I really want to bring hardcore researchers in if I'm going to do any interviews. So you are the first hardcore that I'm going to bring in. All right?
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
Not even softcore, huh?
No, no, we won't go there.
Okay.
So we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. Folks, we're going to get started. Everybody in chat is telling me that all the technical is working. So and I know that Doug, who is really my producer and makes this available by improving the sound and improving the video in post-production. Doug, we're going to go ahead. We're at 12 noon. 1, 2, 3. And welcome, Alana, to the Patrons live stream. And it is February 28th. It is Thursday. You are the first guest I've ever interviewed for the benefit of the patrons, and welcome.
I'm honored. Thank you, Tony.
Well, Alana, you have been a friend for probably 4 years at this point. Our good mutual friend,
Ron Patton.
Ron Patton, who is the producer for the Ground Zero radio program, hosted by our good friend
Clyde Lewis.
Clyde Lewis. I'm looking at my notes here and I'm blanking at the same time. So Clyde Lewis invited me on his show back in, I'm trying to think at the same time, I believe it was 2015. And Ron said to me, you have to meet someone. And the next day we drove up to Tacoma, or Olympia, is it?
Right, Olympia.
Olympia. And we had breakfast with you. The three of us had a great conversation. It's the only time I've actually been able to sit down face to face with you, apart from the technology. And it was a great opportunity to meet you and hear about your research and your books. And I want to thank Ron Patton and Clyde Lewis, one, for introducing me to you, and two, for bringing me on the air in Portland, Oregon in studio, and really kickstarting this whole venture I find myself in. But the show isn't about me today. The conversation is about you. So for those that have never heard of Elana Freeland and have never heard of your books, please do us a favor and give us a short bio. And then I do have your books available here as a graphic that I will put up while you're doing that. And so go ahead, give us the background on who you are and what you're doing here today.
Okay. Yes, I'm pleased to be with you again, Tony. It's been a while. I want your listeners to know that I have been in this what I am calling the anti-geoengineering movement now for about 8 years. I was in pre-2012. I was friends with Clifford Carnicom, an independent scientist. I would say the independent scientist who really broke the news on a science basis for this technology. The news had already been broken in 1995 by a very now famous book, I think, by Nick Begich and Gene Manning called Angels Don't Play This Harp. They were living up in Gakona, Alaska, right almost on site to the construction of a huge acres and acres phased array antenna called HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, not the first ionospheric heater in the US, but certainly the most powerful. In fact, at that point, I would almost say it was the most powerful in the world, including Russia and China. So Nick and Gene let us all know about it. It was it was not in the New York Times Book Review, as you can well imagine, or on CBS. But the book got out. The first people to pick it up, of course, were the adventuresome, that the CIA has called for years, conspiracy theorists. And I found the book, and that was it was reading that book that made it clear to me how important it was, because somehow at a substitute teaching job, I was reading the book in the faculty room, and I assume it was a certain woman sitting at the table when I was discussing the book with a couple of male faculty members during lunch. And the next day, I had a military helicopter over my house for about 5 minutes hovering. And I assumed they were sort of, dialing in my XY coordinates. And then my phone got weird, and I call those the paranoid 90s. And that got my attention. Definitely gets your attention when you have the military visiting your house in your neighborhood. All my neighbors came over. What's going on, Elana?
You're probably downloading your hard drive.
Yeah. Such as it was then, right? Those were the early days of the computer, right?
Yeah.
So the next thing that happened was living in Santa Fe and being friends with Clifford Carnicom, meeting him serendipitously, so-called. I look back, Tony, and I realize how many times I have been led straight to where I need to be in order to learn about this technology. It's, my life, it's like you live a life, but you don't really know while you're living it what you're living. It's true. When you do a retrospective, and especially when you're on a mission like I am. I'm definitely on a mission with this anti-geoengineering. Clifford and I would go to breakfast with some other people, and at Harry's Roadhouse, if you know Santa Fe, wonderful place. That's where I caught a glimpse of Arnold Schwarzenegger with his family. But anyway, and Clifford and I would just start talking about what he was finding from the jets flying overhead and the what was coming out of the combustion chamber. And he noticed it because this was New Mexico. Northern New Mexico had these beautiful, deep, like your wall, Tony, deep blue azure skies,
sure.
Which are now no more. But he noticed these jets, and so he began to make a real effort to collect precipitation and scrape his HEPA filter, his HEPA air cleaner filter, to see what was in it. That's when he discovered fibers, and they looked to be unusual, not just dust, not dust motes by any means, And so then he contrived what is now known as the red wine test. And the red wine test is you clean your mouth and then you slosh around one mouthful of red wine, mostly for the tannins and the dye effect.
Sure.
And so you can see these fibers because they're very, very tiny. They're submicron or micron. So you slosh your mouth around and then you spit the wine into a very clean container. And then you let it either let the fluid dehydrate, or you can already see certain little fibers sort of moving on their own. I highly recommend it to people to do it so they know I'm not confabulating here, because we're all breathing this, and it is coming down from the sky. It's, there's still an argument among activists. Is it just coming from the combustion chamber? Is it because of pyrolysis that takes place in the jet engine? Or is it a supplementary system which is injecting various ingredients into what's coming out the back of the jet? Because of the geomagnetism of the area below. And that I would say is definitely my vote, because the geomagnetism of each area is different. We're not all the same. I mean, I think of how I love northern New Mexico, that red earth, rich in iron, rich in minerals. It's right along the edge of the mountain range, the only, I would say, mountain range in the world that goes from pole to pole, north-south. And that means that that's pretty much the spinal column of the planet, I would say. And it really has those, we all know of Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion, where they talked about the spinal column being the primary energy circuit of the human being, of the consciousness of the human being, in the chakras that are, there's 7. And I often think of that, of how I can't put it well enough, even though I have skill in oral in the words, but there's something about northern New Mexico and that Four Corners area where the earth is so red, so mineral rich, and right on the edge of this mountain range going all the way to pole, that is very stimulating. And many people talk about the spirituality of the area, and a lot of people are drawn there. And I think that is magnetism. And I think that the conductive metals, which are nanoscale, now a nano, for people who don't know, is 1/1000th of a meter. Very, very, very tiny. And nanotechnology is the name of the game now. If you ever read my book, Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown, that's the second book I wrote, and that one came out in spring 2018. In chapter 3, I go deeply into nanotechnology and how it was scooted through Congress with, again, no debate, no real research, just, yes, rubber stamp it. It means money in the future, just like 5G has been scooted through. And I won't even discuss vaccinations. But so in the nano metals coming down, they're very conductive. And that would include metals, aluminum, which is the cheapest, and surface area-wise, the most useful to the military for wireless operations now going on in our ionized atmosphere. Those metals also have to do with this breathing them in. They go into our bodies, go into our lungs. Then from there, they go into the bloodstream. And then they're in our body. And now many of them are heading for the heart, heading for the brain. And because they're nano-sized, they can easily slip through the blood-brain barrier. So we have a scaling up of Alzheimer's at one end of life, and a scaling up of what is the child disease? Autism at the other end. So these are in a way, the bookends of a very sad story. And it is the story of aluminum. We now find out, of course, that the vaccinations have aluminum in them as well. And really, it's not that we've ever not had aluminum in the environment. It's the quantity and it's the size of it. Because as I point out in the chapter on nanotechnology, when you have a particle from the the periodic table, nothing unusual. It's something of the Earth. It's not from Alpha Centauri or anything. You have this size factor, and the size factor, believe it or not, in a quantum way of thinking, is it changes how the behavior is of the periodic table metal, and that behavior becomes erratic, sort of like having an adiabatic quantum computer that suddenly takes its own direction. And again, whether you're talking micro or macro, which is, this is what I attempt to encompass in explaining the big picture of how the environment is being weaponized around us. In other words, it's a dual, like many of the technologies that the military now has bestowed upon modern civilization, and I'm a little cynical when I say that. It is dual use, they call it. And what dual use means is it's used for combatants and non-combatants. It's military and it's civilian. That would include our cell phones, our cell towers, our anything, the Internet of Things, which is going to be a true heyday for what I am calling the space fence lockdown. And the nanoparticle size, and then just like the D-Wave computer or another adiabatic quantum computer, you have something that is behaving unnaturally. So they are moving us, they being military scientists. That would include the Jasons. I don't know if people know about the Jasons. They should know about the Jasons. The Jason Group, as it's called, with all caps and for Jason. And that acronym is taken right from Jason and the Argonauts, the old Greek myth that Freemasons and other secret brotherhoods, so-called, are so fond of. It's sort of the myth of Western civilization, looking for the golden fleece. And so all those scientists and the military-minded who run them and goad them with careers and money and maybe threats, certainly NDAs that they have to sign. Those people I like to think of them as not just military admirals and generals and with lots of brass on them, but more so to me would be the corporate piece of the military industrial intelligence complex. So that would be Lockheed Martin, my friends at Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Raytheon owned all the patents for HARP and pretty much runs HARP to this day, despite the fact that we're told the University of Alaska at Fairbanks is running. But I don't know that our universities are really universities anymore, Tony, to be honest. I don't think they are. I think they're all military contractors now.
Military laboratories.
Yes, they are. And they're held to it. In a variety of ways. Pedophilia would be one of the ways they're held to it. So all of those are involved in this macro micro stretching of the planet because they have what Catherine Austin Fitts, the investment analyst and a good friend now of mine, and a very big fan of my book. I don't know how many copies she's bought and given away. What she would term the secret space program. And that is the latest essay. And Tony, I don't think I've sent it. Yeah, I sent it to you. I sent it to you for your Entangle. The secret space program is now getting less and less secret. As you know, Trump has announced it with the Space Council, first the Space Council, and now the...
And if I can interrupt, the work of Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, whom Catherine Austin Fitts is a very close associate with, the two of them together have produced some extraordinary works on the secret space program.
Yes, and Catherine has done sort of the gone over the books, you might say, because she's so financially skilled, to see that at least $21 trillion is not accounted for in the American budget. So obviously black programs have been going on a long time. People wonder what happened to the space program. Well, it's still going on, whether you believe we went to the moon or not. But it has gone black. And now it's slowly being announced, as is geoengineering, because when Mr. Trump took office, and immediately after, I noticed that geoengineer David Keith was trotted out. He is sort of living in Bill Gates' back pocket, and he was trotted out to say, well, folks, it's too bad. We're going to have to do geoengineering. Gee whiz, too bad we can't get around it. So we're going to, sulfates and et cetera. And the truth is we've had geoengineering now, this particular program, which is going global and needed the ionization of the atmosphere thanks to the experiments that went on with HAARP in conjunction with the Arecibo ionospheric heater, the one at Brookhaven National Labs out on Long Island. They are now able to really do the space program. And that is what SDI always meant in the far back, right? With Reagan, Bush, and Cheney, the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program that went forward to Bill Clinton, but was buried at that point. They were not able to complete it because the atmosphere was not ionized, to just cut to the chase. And it is now those heavy metals that are in the sky. Initially, Tony, I thought that, we're collateral damage, because they need those metals for conductivity and for all of the wireless operations that they're doing for so-called defense, which is, often offense. It wasn't about us, wasn't particularly about it. That's what I used to think. All right, now I'm thinking I've changed. I've changed since the first book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth, which came out in 2014. I learned a whole lot and then knew I had to write that second book. And now I've learned a whole lot, and now I'm writing the third book, which is on synthetic biology, and we're going to actually get to that. But it all just sort of has moved forward. We've moved into the space age. The environment has been weaponized. And part of the reason for the nanoscale entities and metals, and I have to include entities in this. Yes, Morgellons, I'm thinking of Morgellons, but I'm thinking of other pathogens as well. I'm thinking of just nanobots, sensors that are transceivers that have been released. It's been in the mainstream media in the trillions in the upper atmosphere. So all of this is, yes, we are collateral damage, but we are also experimental lab rats in order to see how they can pull off changing not just the planet, which is being changed. The genetic modification of the planet is underway. The genetic modification of all living creatures is underway. And part of that is due to things like CRISPR that you read about. But there's a part that I bring to the table. Thus far, I am the only writer bringing it to the table and the only one talking about it on radio interviews. And that is the nano-sized entities that must be brought into the discussion. Because they're so tiny, you understand we're dealing with an invisible realm, and they're counting on that. They being the scientists who are very interested in how they can weaponize the environment and use the environment to genetically modify life forms like us. And some of those scientists are knowledgeable of a lot of science that our university PhD programs do not have access to. That's very important to know. It isn't that, it's almost like there's a whole other science going on that we are not, we being consensus reality type people, particularly I'm thinking of PhDs, they're very consensus reality people, that we're not aware of, that we don't have access to the same documents, the same histories of science. As you know, it's common knowledge that many inventors are either compromised or marginalized or killed. And you never hear about their free energy modification things, or you think of Rife and the Rife machine and his microscope. I mean, where did these things go? They're gone. No, they're not gone. They're not destroyed. You'll hear that Wilhelm Reich's research and books were burned, and not all of them. I mean, all of these things have been catched away by those who know what I keep saying to people who have less confidence in it than they do. Knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. And if you can acquire knowledge, you are not going to be burning all those books. You are not going to be burning all those research notes. We didn't send back all of Tesla's notes in '43 when the FBI was there in his room and he was dead. We didn't send those back to his homeland in Croatia. No, those notes in particular, I might as well mention, were, as you know, Tony, handed over to Donald Trump's uncle, yep. John Trump, yep. who was a physicist. So knowledge is how all the powers that control our lives from the outside so far, they have acquired over centuries, and the Library of Congress for them would be the Brotherhoods, and that would include the Saturnalian Brotherhood at NASA, mm-hmm. And it would include Freemasons, high degree, not low degree. Low degree is a different thing, and those people are just used primarily to send in their tithes. So I just want you to see how big this picture is, and that I have now brought in another part of this, as dramatic as the D-Wave computer to me. When Geordie Rose says that he feels that he is worshiping at the altar of an alien god, I would say that nature abhors a vacuum, and that the micro world of the nano-sized entities fits that paradigm as well. So what is coming into them is a hater of humanity, in my opinion, and they operate as a swarm. I listened to a video by Jamie Lee. He does many videos. He lives down in the Santa Rosa area of California, and he has lived through these fires that are going on down there, and he's on fire himself. And so he has a series of videos called Paradise Lost. When Paradise, California was destroyed, he was there on ground zero, interviewing just regular people who were there, who lost their homes, who almost lost their lives, and wondered where their neighbors were. But all these people have disappeared from the area. But one of the things he did is he did in his video Paradise Lost number 51, he interviews an anonymous scientist. And I know none of us like it when people are anonymous, but on the other hand, I think we should pay attention to content and do our own thinking and not pay so much attention to who they are, because obviously if this guy is on the level, he wants to stay alive. So I listened very closely to this scientist, and he brought in some things I had not known. I won't go deeply into it at this point, but I wanted to say that he goes into how LEDs, the light-emitting diode bulbs were used in the Paradise Lost fires, how they were triggered by a Li-Fi instrument. And those who don't know what Li-Fi stands for, I will get my cheat sheet out here. It is basically Wi-Fi using light. And you've probably seen a video or heard an ad where, oh, you can use this in your house and you don't have to have Wi-Fi. It goes very short range, but it won't go through walls, so you're going to have, etc. But it is also a dual-use technology for military use as well. So these LEDs were triggered by Li-Fis probably from the satellite, would be my guess. I don't remember that part. And then the other part of this is that I don't know if you've ever noticed in these fires how if you watch the ground of these so-called forest fires, these so-called wildfires, there's a strange behavior of the embers. It almost seems as if the embers are, when you first look at it, I've examined several from the California fires, several videos, including drone video, and you'll see it sort of, it looks like it's blowing across the ground, but upon closer inspection, it almost seems like it's crawling across the ground. And that is exactly what this scientist says. He says that one of the things we know about nano-sized particles is that, and remember, many of them are nanobots, which means they're nanorobots, which means they are intelligent to some degree. They are perhaps in touch with a sort of fusion center for nano-sized particles that would include the sensors. I mean, think of all the sensors that are flying around you right now that you can't see, because the military has released trillions and trillions and trillions of them, and many end up in centrifugal formation around the Earth for the space fence in the near-Earth orbit, but many of them fall to the Earth, are picked up by winds or whatever, and end up in the atmosphere, and we breathe them in. Well, these sensors are in touch with various, I call them the laptop boys. They're picking up data, and then they're sending it to AI systems that are crunching the data. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of our air now, folks. And it isn't just our air, it's the air we're breathing. And so it isn't just the air we're breathing, it's in our bodies, all right? So I just want to be clear about that.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Say it again?
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
The videos you're speaking of, I did watch a number of them from Jamie Lee on Paradise Lost. And the one I found remarkable, the nano swarms. the embers operating intelligently, moving horizontally in swarms, leapfrogging, setting new fires, and then moving on to another location, obviously under intelligent control. Either within themselves as a swarm, much like birds, fish, or from external, or both, a combination of external and internal, having a sense of AI control on an internal level.
Yes, that's it. Tony just said what I was getting to with too much stuff.
That's okay. I don't mean to interrupt. I just acknowledging you and I are seeing the same thing.
And that is Paradise Lost number 51. If anyone wants to see it, if you can find it, his whole YouTube page has been removed.
Oh, really?
So, oh yes, he's constantly, and he's criticized for various things, but he's done a lion's share of work on that Paradise Fire and the Santa Rosa Fire. And if he gets too excited sometimes and just takes off, can you imagine the scope of his production, Tony? I mean, I think he has Paradise Lost number 90 something.
Oh,
I mean,
gosh.
How do you do that? Are there enough hours in the day to do what he does? So I wanted to make that clear, that this nano size is extremely important to understand because we're going to be dealing with it. Okay, so let me just add the last piece to this. I know I've skipped a lot of things, and I'm sorry some of you may not be up on everything. And you know how that goes. You can't do everything. But the 5G, let's talk about that for a minute. Sure. The 5G is coming, they say. I personally believe something I was told by someone months ago, maybe even a year ago, that the 4G phones already have tiny phased array antennas in them, which is the hallmark of the 5G. Mm-hmm. So it would make sense to me that this is true, that the 4G has been prepared, because when all the information started coming out about 5G, I mean, it was a tidal wave of information. I don't know if you remember, Tony, but it was like bam, 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 bam. I mean, from everywhere. It wasn't just alternative press. Yep. Yes, you had basic themes being followed by the mainstream media, which was, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to make money, and you're going to have to be able to download all those movies you love. And on the other side, it was, these millimeter waves are going to kill us.
Yep.
So, but just the barrage was noteworthy. And I thought to myself at that time, I remember thinking, wow, this is just going crazy. What is this? I mean, it was, yes, with the smart meter fear and wake up of the public, it was considerable. There were considerable alternative articles and Facebook activity around that, but nothing like 5G. So right away, I wondered, because now I consider paranoia to be my sixth sense. I wondered if it had to do with, all right, so they're now letting the bad press out about the 5G. So a lot of people probably won't buy the 5G as much as they want to. They want those fast downloads, etc. Maybe the important generation, the younger generations who are more ignorant of the past and what nature really is and what life really could be, will continue, because they'll know that their careers depend on being state of the art. But so I know they wanted to pick up everybody, whether they had the 5G phone or not, or the 5G router. Mm-hmm. So it made sense that they would put the phased array antenna into the 4G as well. Because I think that's how they're going to do it. They're going to do a sweep on the 4G. The 4G had no mixed press when it came out. But the 5G definitely does. So that's one part. Another way they're going to fill in the gaps, as we all know, is the little satellites, the CubeSats. The CubeSats that have been launched now, apparently, and I'm sure more are going up all the time. It's going to be as cluttered up there as the repo parking lot, Tony.
Yeah. Well,
So
the plan, as I understand it, is to have a total of 20,000 new satellites, the phased array equipped satellites, over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years.
right, that's what they're saying. My guess is you could probably times that by 5.
Sure.
Because now, with part of the space fence, when they say that the space fence that Lockheed Martin runs and owns all the patents for, by the way, and they calibrate all the space fence infrastructure here on the ground and in near Earth orbit to also count all the trash, is how they say it. Yeah, we're counting trash to make sure our satellites are safe, our rockets are safe, but they're also they also are controlling all that trash, because now they have released the nano sensors and the nanobots up there, and those are what they're running, and those can easily move into, onto, through any of the devices up there. And so they're going to control all of them. So I don't know that they see that they need a limitation. Plus, when we say space or near Earth orbit, you're talking multiple levels, sort of like an apartment building, right? You've got a lot of levels. You don't have to go 200,000 miles out. So, so yeah, that they're going to fill in the gaps on the 5G with the satellites as well. So I've got 4G, I've got the satellites, and now we think of all these antennas, and I get lots of people asking me, sending me photos of antennas. Is this one of the 5G, Elana? Is this a 5G? And, you know, truthfully, I know I've heard it's the small refrigerator-sized box. I have been told that it's also the whatever it is on top of the pole. We won't be able to see most of them. They're going to be very small, and they're going to be. You're just not even going to know they're there. They're everywhere. They're going to be everywhere, and I'm not counting on the fact that we could have movements that stop the implementation of it. I know people are excited about that, but I just want to say once and for all, and I'm going to sound very much like a wet rag when I say this, throwing a blanket over the best of intentions of citizen movement. Citizens in America are accustomed to doing their due diligence to protect the republic through public demonstrations. That's one way. And writing to your congressman is another. Petitions. These are all the old forms before the technocracy. But we are now living in a technocracy. They would like you to be busy doing those things so that you feel you're doing something worthwhile. And it is worthwhile. You're meeting amazing people, amazing citizens who want to stop things. But we're going to have to think with another side of our brain on this, because these techniques, as you know, it would be very easy to stop a public demonstration with an LRAD. Yep. Or an ADS, these military millimeter wave implements.
Active denial systems.
Active denial systems. And they're not doing that. And what they're going to use is this millimeter wave active denial system. Agreed. Right? Agreed. The 5G. And they're going, Tony, they're going to be able to do that because we have the matrix of that in our systems already, the nanobots, all of these conductive metals. They're going to just dial in to whole swaths, whole neighborhoods, whole regions, I don't know if size even matters when you're living in a quantum world that has been adjusted. So that's important to know is, will you be able to protect yourself? Well, the best protection I see at this point, and I'm still researching and I'm still uncovering many things, but the best so far to me is heavy metal detox and eating in a way where you retain an alkaline environment in your body. The one thing I know about Clifford's just endless 2 decades of work on the Morgellons pathogen, or as he calls it, the cross-domain bacteria, CDB, is that it hates alkalinity and goes into stasis. It will not reproduce. It will not move. And it loves acidity. So if you have a certain diet, and you've got to have a quart of ice cream every night, for example, you're in trouble because the acidity in the body will be of a tidal wave proportion, and you will lose your health. There's no question. Your immune system cannot operate in imbalance for very long. It will not defend you anymore. And I think all the autoimmune diseases in this civilization, so-called, what we have created with chips and candy and pop and all the things that the GMO feedlots of cows being fed, being fed their own bodies. So, you can't go long on this without the immune system paying, and the immune system on a sheerly physical level, which I think I need to address first, because you won't be an activist who will be helpful in this very long once you are obsessed with keeping fragments of your health. And you'll be running to doctors and the medical industry and the big pharma. And believe me, either they're not going to know about this and they're not going to treat it, they're going to treat the symptoms as they always do, or they've been bought off and they're complicit and they're not going to tell you the truth. So, I'm living proof of that. I haven't been to a doctor since I was 13. I studied Chinese medicine for 6 years. I know what alkaline acidity means. I know that sometimes you can have something acidic and it will turn into alkaline and it will turn into acidic. You've got to experiment. You've got to experiment with your own body, but take it seriously. This is your number one priority. Number two is knowledge of, like Tony, he is my go-to man for CERN, and it looks like he's going to be my go-to man for DNA. So, look around you, see who's doing real research, who's really got a handle on a particular aspect of this giant elephant in the living room that we're all sort of feeling our way around to figure out just what its dimensions are and what it means that it's going to do to us, because it's in our living room, and take it seriously. This is not an intellectual exercise. This is not internet entertainment. No. And so the 5G, I could talk about how it's going to shatter the mitochondria around the DNA. It's going to shatter the DNA. And Tony, in a way today, I've done all this to bring my nanos to the table, but I really, in a way, I want to sneak in and interview you as well, because I want to find some things out and compare some things so that I stay on the right track with the DNA and with what CERN is putting forth along inside the space fence, because CERN is part of the space fence, no question, because the calibration happens across the board, whether it's a radar installation or NexRads across the country or cell towers or Gwen towers. All of this is calibrated along with fracking, along with wind towers. This is turning the Earth into a machine that can be controlled by an AI. This is an outrageous proposition. And when I look back, I've been watching this happen my whole life, right? Yep. But I look back and see the jump we have made in the last 20 years And I'm in shock because, and even I who know maybe more than the average person does, because I've been watching this unfold over all this time. And so to me, it is a spiritual war. It's absolutely a war for the future of humanity. There's no question. I'm about all hands on deck. I spend all my life doing this. I have no private life. I don't even want a private life because I want to focus on this and bring out as much as I can. But I really feel, Tony, that this next book on synthetic biology, and by the way, I am not going to obey their paradigm for how they define synthetic biology. I'm going to make it much bigger because it is much bigger. It has to do with the environment. It has to do with what's coming at us from the environment. They're going to use the environment to turn us into transhumanist cyborgs.
Mm-hmm.
That's
completely agree with you.
Using the environment is brilliant. I was wondering how they were going to jam all of us into clinics, hospitals. What were they going to do? Just sort of throw an E. coli or an Ebola bomb into us and get rid of, half of Africa? I was wondering how they were going to do it and control it. And first they turned our whole world into a wireless instrument. And then they brought in the ionizing through chemicals and wireless. And then they began delivering the nanos. And then we breathed them in. And it's good to go. And the 5G to me is the linchpin. So I'm now we can take a breath and.
Well, let's take one question just before we completely shift gears. Kathy Smith in the chat room had asked earlier, and Kathy, I acknowledge that you had sent me an email question on this a few days ago, and I just haven't gotten around to responding to it. Let me check. Okay, Elana, my laptop just went black, and now it's come back. So I'm checking with the chat room. Can you guys still see and hear us okay? Because I lost the laptop momentarily there as I was about to ask a question of Elana. So let's do a systems check. Are you guys still seeing and hearing me in the live stream? And I know there's a bit of a delay before I get an answer on the screen. I think we're okay. But guys, give me a heads up in the chat room. I know that we're expecting interference. Okay, we're good to go. All right. So the question from Kathy Smith in the chat room was diatomaceous earth, which, if folks don't know what that is, it's essentially the leftover bodies of sea creatures, very small, almost microscopic skeletons of plant and animal life predominantly in the sea, but often it is used as a filter medium, especially in swimming pools, as a filter system. But does diatomaceous earth come across your radar in terms of Morgellons, nanoparticles, nanobots, heavy metals being ridden from the body? Will it raise the pH to a more alkaline pH level? Does it function in any of those areas?
Oh, that's a good. I hadn't thought of the pH factor of diatomaceous earth. Like I said, a lot of people in the anti-geoengineering movement, and I keep my hand on the pulse of my closed site, my closed Facebook site, is how I kind of follow what people are doing. But people are experimenting with their own bodies now. First, it was the Morgellons sufferers who were experimenting most assiduously because they're in pain. And many of them are closeted in their homes because they don't want to be seen in public with the sores and the suppuration and stuff going on. Sure. So they were the first ones who were really taking it seriously and trying this and trying that. I have never taken diatomaceous earth, but I can say that I'm beginning to get a feel in my thinking for how there are levels. Now, you can do a level that will give relief. You could find something that will give you relief, but it really won't move the nanos much at all. And you're breathing them every day. It's not like you breathed them last week and you want to get them out now so you can be rid of them. It's a matter of unloading as you go. That's really what we need. And I consider at this point, and I may be wrong, and I would need to see, I don't know, a half dozen, a dozen people for whom it has done miracles. But, when you hear that, I don't know what else they've done. Right.
Sure.
I'm not their physician, so I can't really do the data check. I would love to do. I would love to do it, but I'm not able to. One thing I do know is Tony Pantalaresco, a Canadian. He is doing the lion's share of using his engineering background to address the nanometals problem with magnetism, and he's having great success. So let me give you an idea. I do Tony's bath. The first thing I learned from Tony was to build a foot bath and do a foot bath with I can't remember, 12 volt attached to it, copper all the way around a regular bucket, and then put vinegar in and water, and then turn it all on, and then the nanos just kind of pour out of your feet. I didn't do that long enough in order to say yes, that worked, because Tony quickly moved on to an entire bath, and so I take the bath once a week minimum. And that is with 1 cup of sea salt, 1 cup of borax, and 1 cup of Epsom salts. And I just get the bath hot. I get in. I soak for as long as I can stand it. I'm not very good at taking baths. I stay in about probably 15 minutes. If I wanted to see what was coming out while in the bath, I would turn the lights out in the bathroom. It's quite exciting, actually. I did it that way once. And you got a flashlight with you, and you're like, aha! And you look at the film on the top of the water, and there's a lot of debris there. Now, is the debris from my skin? It's kind of like the red wine test. Is it tissue from inside? Well,
so pour some wine in the bath.
Hey, I hadn't thought of that. That'd be a big waste of wine, Tony. But if I had a microscope small enough, now I have a 60 power that I carry around with me, a really teeny weeny little thing. Let me show you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I carry this everywhere. And this is how I know that all the fruit and vegetables, even, and it has 2 lights, has an LED, and it has a black light. I can tell, I can look at fruit and vegetables in stores, and I can see the fibers. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Get ready. They're everywhere.
It's disgusting.
Anyway, sorry to pop your bubble. But you can see them, but I can't see that they're moving. If I had the right microscope, I could see if they were moving and see the difference between just skin debris and actual nanos. And the metals, sometimes you can see the glittery stuff. And the glittery stuff, now we're in the realm of sensors, and I think they call them markers.
Right.
So, so that's one thing. Then he did something else. He was on to the next project. And the next project was using cutting boards that you could buy at the Goodwill. All have to be the same size, and putting them in a triangle, and then wrapping them with duct tape over magnets. Neridium, I can't remember the name of the magnet, but it's about that big, and you've got pretty much 12 per side. and you're doing them so that they're polar opposites of pairs. So you're pressing them together because they're opposed to each other, and you do that all the way around. Then you again wrap it with the more of the tape, and then put it all in plastic so that you can actually take it in the bath with you. And when you do that and you put it over various parts of the body, now you're cooking. And they're driven out through the pores and the orifices. So
I think the magnets are niobium. It's not niobium. It's not niobium like they use at CERN, but it's a very closely associated word.
Yes,
niobium.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I'm voting on a magnetic, not necessarily an electromagnetic, but a magnetic solution to these metals. But it's going to mean that, as Tony says, he's willing to build these for people, but he doesn't want to be bothered with like making a business or making money or anything. He would prefer that people make them themselves, so that they
magnets are available through craft stores and Amazon.
Yes.
They're typically very small, smaller than the diameter, or almost equivalent in diameter to a pencil eraser. But they're very strong magnets, and usually you can buy them in just a little tube of about, I want to say 8 or 10 in a tube. They're very inexpensive, but they're much stronger than a typical rubber or iron filings type of a composition magnet. They're much stronger than that. They're not your average everyday. That's
right.
They look like they're almost chrome plated, nickel plated.
Yes, and I think so. This all started with the question about diatomaceous earth. My question about diatomaceous earth is, does it have any nanoparticles in it? I tend to think that any remedy that is using nano to drive nano out just can't really be true. I don't know that we can use there are medicinals that are being sold. There's all kinds of things, right? Eat cilantro, and and that'll drive the heavy metals out. But again, we're at that levels of control over the nano population in us. A lot of people think still that it's just the pollution. And that the jet problem is also just a pollution problem. It is not just a pollution problem. It is this nanoscale that is the bigger problem. So we're all scientists now. We're all in labs. Our lab is our body, and we need to share information as much as we can if we find something that really is good. But at this point, instead of a substance, I would vote for the magnetic way. That this makes more sense to me, given that they are magnetic.
Well, let me ask you this. The composition of nanobots and nanomaterials, from my reading, most, and I'm sure this doesn't cover all, but most are composed of carbon, C60 carbon. And so the question often is posed to me, should we be taking C60 carbon supplements and whatnot that are out there? And my answer has always been no, don't take in carbon into your system. You need something that is going to rid them. And I think that if we're talking about carbon, in particular, it is conductive. It is electrically conductive. This is why we see carbon being used in electronics so much now. The buckyballs, the Buckminster fullerenes, the nano paper, or Bucky paper as it's being called in electronics now. So using a magnet to either repulse and drive out, or to attract using a magnetic field bath, is what you're essentially talking about, makes sense to me, to attract them out of the body.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you brought up C60 because if you go to Tony Pantalaresco's, he has like 3 sites. At one of them, he just goes on a tirade about C60 and says very clearly that this will be used to control you from outside your body.
Agreed.
And you must not take C60.
Good.
So, and I've been pretty much macrobiotic since I was 21. Not religiously so, but definitely thinking in terms of Chinese medicine for what I eat and how I conduct life and things. But I would say that natural foods and natural living is my main medicine. I have never been a supplement taker. I really don't know much about supplements. People ask me, what supplement should I take? I have no idea. Like somebody gave me this. They gave me this turmeric. Well, it's very, very nice and rather expensive, I realized. And
isn't that an acid?
Well, it doesn't really matter in the small run, Tony, if it's acid. It's more your whole day of imbibing what that creates in the blood. And if you ever need to know how your blood is doing, you can just get a little glob of spit on your finger and go like this. If you can't stretch it, if it breaks, you're probably running acid. And so, anyway, what I'm saying is, I don't really.
Are you going to demonstrate that?
Oh, how mine is?
No. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I didn't know if that
remember,
was
from pH can be tested using litmus paper, and you can go to the pharmacy and you can buy litmus paper strips. You don't have to do anything extraordinary, and you don't have to dip urine. Don't worry, people. You can use your saliva. And you can dip litmus paper into your saliva, and there's a little colored graph on the side of the bottle of the container, and it'll show you the pH range, whether you're acidic or if you are alkaline. If you have to really scrounge for it, go to your local pool supply company. They happen to sell diatomaceous earth for filtering, but they also sell litmus paper for testing the pH of the water in your local swimming pool. Okay? Anyway, go ahead.
Right. That'd be good to even test your water, wouldn't it? To see how that is, because that's another thing that's very important, right, in this acid alkaline thing of just the core diet is, and I'm talking core diet. This is not going to solve all your problems, but this is sort of the beginning, is the alkalinizing of the body, because it is well known that this pathogen, and I think I may be tooting my own horn here, but I think I was the one that called Clifford's attention to that acid alkaline paradigm in Chinese medicine, where they're very big on that yin yang, acid alkaline. But it was also he had those petri dishes going, and he was experimenting with them. And speaking of Tony's, electrical foot bath and the bath with the magnetism. That's one thing that Clifford did too. Is he did an electrolytic experiment in one of the petri dishes on the fibers to see if they would, and when he would get it to exactly the crossover from acid to alkaline, and the acid, they'd be moving, and then it would cross over into the alkaline, and they are very reproductive. In fact, I would say that either the Morgellons pathogen or some other devious Frankensteinian thing is forcing in the body to develop a neural mesh that Elon Musk mentioned as being protective.
His neural net.
Yes, and it's in the body because in Morgellons victims, sometimes they can actually see the net forming. And I had a small outbreak. This is maybe interesting to you, Tony, and your listeners. Clifford and I had decided to spend a week in his lab a couple years ago. He was living then. He and Carol were living in Idaho. So I drove over across state and went to to stay with him. But before I left, about 2 weeks before I left, I suddenly had an outbreak on my calves, and it definitely looked like Morgellons. And I thought the timing was odd because I wasn't doing anything different. But I and my little leggies went over to Idaho, and Clifford and I, in his lab, scraped my skin with a razor blade in order to get some cells, in order to look at them under his very high-powered electrical microscope. So, yes, it did have Morgellons fibers in it, but it was something else. And he kept those specimens. I don't know what he's done since, because I came back, and within 3 weeks, it was all gone. And I decided that it had been remotely triggered in me somehow. I didn't know how, but it was because I was going to visit Clifford.
Did they appear on your skin? Did they have a distinctive color or shading?
No, but they would form a little head from a pore, and I could almost feel them coming out. And so I would reach down and just very gently scrape it with my fingernail, and then put it under my microscope. And it was always, most often, it was a crystal.
Mm.
They were all tiny crystals, and they were amber colored. And sometimes I would get one completely wrapped with a hair of mine and a Morgellons fiber. So it was a real low key. It was not comfortable. I used, speaking of remedies, I used a spray bottle of colloidal silver and sprayed my legs whenever I would get that itchy thing, or it would, or I'd be going to sleep at night. That's when they became most active. So I would spray them before. I thought I was going to have to live with this, and the thought that it was for Clifford did not appear to me until they just disappeared overnight. And I mean overnight.
Yeah.
They're gone after I got back. So I did talk to a Morgellons survivor in California when I was giving a talk down there, and she said that she had been a professor of botany at UC Santa Cruz, and she said that she was convinced that the Morgellons lesions, the outbreaks, are definitely remotely triggered. And that's why a lot of the population does not have the lesions, and therefore is not at all curious about this phenomenon being in our bloodstream, in our bodies, because it is in us. Could it all, by remote, could they kill them all? Yes, they could. Absolutely.
Kill the Morgellons or kill the individual host?
Kill Morgellons. Yeah, kill the Morgellons.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Remotely. Yeah, because they are very much in touch. They are transceivers themselves. They've been genetically modified to have a transceiving function. So anyway, we did that. Where were we? We were going to shift schedule. We did the diatomaceous earth. I mentioned the colloidal silver. I don't take it internally. I'm a little doubtful about that, but I do keep a spray bottle around for if I have noticed that if I go out to dinner with someone and I eat GMOs, because I am very much an organic person. I've eaten organic since I was 21. And I am a member of a co-op where I get good quality food. I'm primarily vegetarian, but it's not a religious thing. It's just that my body functions better without meat, and I'm an adult and I don't really need it. I can eat the vegetable directly instead of eating the middleman. But I have noticed that if I eat out, and I'm sure that they're using genetically modified foods in restaurants to keep costs low, I will have a sort of itchiness. In other words, my calves now have become sort of my thermometer.
Or barometer.
My barometer for Morgellons activity.
Yeah.
Because the GMOs are a supplementary delivery system, just along with the jets, along with the rockets, and along with the drones. And then the vaccination is yet another delivery system.
Yep.
So we're in agreement on that, huh?
Oh, yeah, definitely. In fact, that was the first public presentation that I ever made, was against vaccinations.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Because I didn't vaccinate my children. I lied. I lied and I lied and I lied.
And you liked it.
I did, because it was the Nazi in the or Jews in the basement. Remember? I mean, if you're hiding Jews,
sure,
the Nazis come to the door,
yep,
you're going to lie.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the best thing you can do.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you were going to interview me. That was the shift from the diatomaceous commercial break we did, our transition or our segue. But yeah, I'm happy to have a conversation anywhere you want to go at this point. I know that we do want to talk about the DNA, and I sent you, I think it was yesterday, the story about now there is an 8-lettered DNA.
Yes.
So I thought you would find that fascinating.
Well, I want to hear what you have to say about that, and I want you to explain to me again the 3-strand DNA argument, because I'm going through your videos now again and taking notes in order to draw it back to my consciousness, but I want to hear straight from the horse's mouth if I can.
Okay. Well, my scenario for many years has been the dormant DNA, the dormant nanobots, and you've already covered that today, and so we're on the same page. And my scenario is that nanoparticles that lie dormant will be triggered through a Wi-Fi signal relative to, from the Christian perspective, relative to the taking of the mark of the beast, the decision, free will, even through the deception, but still a free will decision whether or not to take the mark of the beast. It will be a conscious decision made by people.
And that's through what people are calling the beast system, right?
Correct, the beast system. And so you have this full immersion within 5G that we exist in right now, that's being added to through satellites, in addition to the already apparent delivery systems of 5G. And on the note of the 4G phone having the phased array 5G capability, completely agree with you. But the scenario being that this full spectrum dominance, in which we are in an ionized atmosphere that allows this wireless communication to take place, coupled with the density of the nanoparticles that have been delivered through the various routes you've described into our bodies, results in one of the forms of nanoparticles being DNA particles that are dormant until the decision is made to accept the mark of the beast. And then that signal, which is essentially triggered by your decision, that signal then enters the body, activating these dormant DNA particles to then begin to replicate through the normal RNA replication process. So you go from DNA to RNA. RNA, as the audience knows, and you know, is the real replication portion of this discussion, to where now a 3rd strand begins to grow around the double helix. And that this 3rd strand not only changes the biology of your body, but it literally changes the way that you think. So when you talk about the neural lace in the Morgellons discussion, the neural lace is what this 3rd strand deploying across the neurons of the mind results in terms of your consciousness, resulting in your lack of awareness that you've even undergone any change.
Yes.
And that the lack of awareness is not only the insidious part of this, but it also results in your being connected through 5G to now the collective mind, the so-called hive mind of all of those that are now part of the beast system. And from Scripture, from the Christian perspective, you are no longer found in the book of life. God doesn't recognize you as his creation, because your DNA has now been changed, and therefore you are now separated from God biologically because you are now part of the beast system. And that's the short version.
And what role from that article you sent me, how do you see that playing into the third strand? I assume you do.
Yeah, I think that what they're doing is they're adding more of the ribosomes to the existing double helix structure in preparation for this third strand, which will have more than just the base 4 ribosomes. It will actually have 8. And I believe we already have those 8 lettered, so to speak, in the third strand itself, the 8 lettered DNA. So we have additional ribosomes that have already been added, but they're dormant, they're not replicating. But those letters are already there. And so this, calling it disclosure, if you will, we know that even in the scientific papers, what we're reading is old news.
Right.
But the fact that they're disclosing it right now as some new discovery, and they hail it as remarkable, and of course the benevolent scenario is put forth of Alzheimer's, cancer, et cetera, is just the sales pitch. But I believe that the dormant nanoparticles already contain probably more, because in the same article they're talking about 10 and 12 lettered DNA. So we don't really know how many letters, in other words, the letters are the ribosomes. We don't really know how many building blocks of DNA that they've added in terms of letters. Suffice it to say, we do have a genetically engineered third strand waiting to be triggered within us.
And it seems to me that with the vaccination schedule ramped up amazingly now, I think I read that 27 vaccinations are expected between birth and 18 years old. I would assume that those vaccinations are piggybacked with added something to do with the DNA change coming.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I think it was in January of 2013 when I produced my first video. I actually paid a friend of mine who was a videographer to videotape me because I had never posted anything online in terms of a video. I'd never come public. And so he was nice enough to do that and post it to his YouTube channel that I linked on my website. So in that public disclosure, I was saying that the dormant nanoparticles, the primary delivery system to the body, was through the vaccination programs. I hadn't even factored in what we now are talking about today in terms of the multiple routes into the body.
Right, in weaponizing the environment. All right, so let's kind of, because everything's connected, and I'm not being, new age here. It is connected in this realm of how the environment and what's coming at us from outside is being used to move us toward transhumanism. So they come out with these 8 letters yesterday, I believe, or at least in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
So that's a revelation to most people. But you and I both know that this is a done deal. This was a done deal quite a while ago.
Sure.
And then, and you're saying that we have the antecedents of that change in us already, along with the nano delivery systems that we've been discussing. I mean, it's got to be part of it. That would include GMOs along with what's coming aerially. And then Trump, Then Trump announces again his space program, what's he calling it now? Space Force?
Space Force. Let me just pause for a moment. I'm going to put up the graphic here. I don't want to lose your audio. The last time I tried to put a graphic up while you were speaking, I think we momentarily lost your audio.
Okay.
So let me just test this real quick. I have a graphic up. I know you can't see it, but the patrons should be able to see a graphic of an 8-strand double helix.
Great.
Up right now. So let's see if you guys, are you still hearing our audio as this comes through as the 8-letter Let me know in the chat room if you're still able to hear my audio with this graphic in place. And I'm waiting for the chat room. A little bit of a lag, but let me know. Okay, they can still see and hear. So we'll continue with the graphics. Go ahead.
Okay, so you've got the graphic of the 8-strand up?
Yep.
Okay, so we have this article come out as a revelation. We have the Space Force re-announcement. He announced it before. And then we had the geoengineering announced 2 years ago now, exactly, as being essential to do. So if people understand that these announcements are not necessarily for disparate things, to me, they're all connected. Everything now is heading toward not only smart cities in which there will be absolute lockdown, but toward the changing of the human being into at least, if not an entire other species, it will be into a species which now is forced, like you were saying, with the beast system, the mark of the beast, will be forced to go a different direction from the rest of humanity. And meanwhile, that is how I see that that's all planned for the generations coming, perhaps having begun already with the young generations I'm encountering now, who literally seem asleep to me or in a dream state and glued to their phones and really unable to really think. They are obviously more plugged in than I am because, well, partly because they are unaware that there's anything to be plugged into. This is the entire wireless paradigm is what they were born into. They're not even just born into, they were in utero when their mother was probably on the cell phone. So this is already, I'm getting a sort of vision of another species coming up. And in these 8 strands and the additional letters, what do you think what do you think those are going to keynote, Tony? Is it going to be a human being who looks like it does now, or is it more going to be the skill level or the qualities of I won't call it soul, the qualities of what moves them forward? What do you have any thoughts? Or I know you're probably going into this in your novels, which I haven't read since the first one.
No, actually not in the novels, but I think if you stick with my magazine, even more than my videos, my audio, I think if you stick to the magazines, you'll gain the information more rapidly and to a deeper conversation.
Okay.
And with sources. To borrow from the military intelligence group, compartmentalization of humanity. Human 2.0 is a surf class. And in the surf class, you have division of labor because of skill sets. And those skill sets will be programmed into people so that they perform only those functions that those in a position of power want them to operate in those functions, to perform those necessities required of the dexterity of a human. Not necessarily the mind of a human, but the dexterity. Now, the other part of this that I would offer to you, and I'm sure you know this because you've heard me talk about them so much, but it is the company that was founded by Dr. Jordy Rose from D-Wave, which is Sanctuary.ai, and Sanctuary's hallmark statement from Dr. Suzanne Gildert, one of the founders, is creating synthetic life forms. They call them synths. Synthetic life forms that are, quote, indistinguishable from a human. So that is the scenario they put forth, but in their gallery of pictures from the website, in their video presentations as well, they still put forth the old nuts and bolts robot with the plastic skin as their synths.
Which is hilarious.
Absolutely. So would you not agree from your research into the
Yeah.
biological sense that their sense, as I've described them, as biological sense, as opposed to nuts and bolts?
Yes. In fact, I I have been called weekly, biweekly for about 3 years now by a targeted individual in London, living in Trafalgar Square, in a very elite apartment building, and she owns her flat. But she is being mercilessly targeted because she is older now, and possibly it's people who want her flat. And that's how crass and low things have gotten. Is you're going to torture someone to get them out so you can have their apartment. Well, what happens is, and she describes it in detail, she's doing very well, I have to say. She is looking at it in exactly the right way of, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction that I'm in pain. And they microwave her every night. She has lesions and burn marks all over her body. She's in her late 70s. So evil is on the move in that way. How many people, as long as I'm on the targeting thing, how many people would I say? Because I'm in touch with at least a dozen. I would say that in America alone, there must be 1 million to 1.5 million people being targeted in their homes, in their place of work, in the streets. All right. So something interesting has come up in the last year, and I think it might be a sin. Is it a sin or a synth?
SYNTH.
A synth. I think it might be a synth. Living upstairs from her, there's always someone, and they change. Someone put above her, below her, next to her, on the other side, and then across the hall, so that she's constantly surrounded by noise or microwaves all night long. So for her sleep, she only can sleep in small snatches. So the woman who was upstairs from her until more recently, apparently the ones running this operation, probably MI5 would be my guess, must have not been satisfied with her cruelty level or her energy for torture, because they've now replaced her with a fellow from Israel. And but this woman, my friend would sometimes encounter her in the lift, in the elevator, and she took really several close looks at her and actually had polite conversation that, the British really know how to do that.
Sure.
Unlike Americans.
We have no style and no class.
No, we don't. So she's the one who said to me, my God, Elana, this woman is perfect, a perfect physical specimen. But I know she's not real. I can feel it with my human sense. She is not real, even though everything looks real. And I immediately realized that London is just, ground zero for testing. They were the first ones who had all those cameras downtown. That was when I was living in England, and everywhere I went, there must have been, there were just hundreds of cameras everywhere, not just the traffic cameras, but the teeny weeny cameras on lampposts at corners and everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that the synths are loosed in London, and this lovely lady is so good at discerning these synths, or that people are not the same. A lot of people are being, and I wanted to mention this, Tony, a lot of people are being pulsed through their cell phones with frequencies that have to do with emotional signatures, and they should beware of that. My town in particular, it looks like to me that it's been being pulsed with complacency and hate Trump, I would say. So that's the pulsing is, if ever anyone has a thought that is they don't think is theirs, or they find themselves in a mood that comes from nowhere, really, really, I highly recommend to people to consider chucking your military weapon called a cell phone. I don't own one. I don't need one. I don't need people to know where I am, especially, the fellows who watch me, where I am all the time. But
Yeah.
they are more than that.
Unfortunately, I have mine.
I know you do, but one could, you can't undo the battery anymore, of course not, but you could put it in your car at night, as far from your sleep area as possible, unplug your router at night, and sleep with your head to the north. All these things will help people that are having sleep problems, because a lot of people are having sleep problems. So anyway, I wanted to say, I think synths are in London, at least.
Well, I would agree with you. My wife Kathleen has often often asked me the question, do you think that synths are already out there? And based on what you just said, we're in agreement that they're already out there. And they're never going to publicly release information, as we said earlier, that isn't already old news.
Yeah.
So, there's very little for us to, quote, discover and disclose. But what we are doing in our mission, and I agree with you, we are both on a mission, as many other researchers are, is to point out the evidence of evil to people.
Right.
Because to be complacent, as you just mentioned, whether that's a pulse or a choice to be complacent, you're not only doing yourself a disservice, but you're not helping your fellow human being. And the only way really to combat the technology is through our own introspection, our own self-awareness, our own critical thinking, our own research, so that we can take definitive actions for ourselves and then those that we have in our sphere of influence to be able to reach out and help other people. Can we stop the technologies? No, we're both in agreement to that. So it is
That's
an
right.
individual action-based activism that we're putting forth here. And the knowledge is power is absolutely the best weapon that we have to take that action.
So, Tony, what would be your thoughts on the relationship of the soul to these synths? What is I'm very aware that the motive power behind Elana is, on one level, my soul, and that it is in here, and I know it is in here. And when I do that, I immediately, my hands go to my heart, because I'm operating now, to my knowledge, primarily out of my heart, with my brain providing what I like to use the metaphor, it is my diving board for my dive. And that's it. It doesn't produce my thought, but it provides the diving board that makes for a better dive. But what about the synths? Now, they have been modeled on human beings to a T, to perfection. They look like a human being. They go through I don't know if they eat. I don't know if they sleep. I don't know much about them yet. But what would be the motive part? Is it simply an AI running it? I mean, how could that be? Or is it, back to my original thought, nature abhors a vacuum, and this is a vacuum in this synth, and so an entity enters that synth and utilizes it? Would that be your picture of it?
Absolutely, and I've said so many times publicly on these live streams. And I think you would agree with me that our soul is a spirit. It is our spirit. We would define our soul as our spirit. I don't think that they're separate, that they're a distinctive spirit and a distinctive soul. I think the power of our soul is the spirit. And when Christians are indwelt with the Holy Spirit, there is a displacement of the old spirit by the new spirit. And from that new spirit, the Holy Spirit, we are given the full armor of God. And so my active defense against all of this, which is spiritually driven, spiritually conveyed, spiritually controlled, is to put on the spiritual full armor of God to repulse it. But it is not just defensive, it is actually also an offensive weapon. But if people are looking for solutions, in my viewpoint as a Christian, it is the defensive armor first. Then once you are protected, you can step into the battlefield and use that armor, because it includes a weapons system, the spear and the sword and the shield, as an offensive weapon system. So that's the not only analogy, but the literal, in my mind, the way that our soul can be first protected and then our soul can be used to go against the enemy. Because absolutely, the vacuum in a synthetic life form can take in either the Holy Spirit, which it won't because it doesn't have the mind that was created by God to communicate with God, to communicate with Jesus Christ, to then be able to bring in and be indwelt by the Holy Spirit. Therefore, the only scenario that plays out, because it is a binary, it is the black and white, it is, as you would say, the yin and yang, it is this enemy side, this evil side, this other spirit that comes in and indwells the synthetic life form. Because the mind itself that is created is artificial. It is an artificially intelligent.
The mind of the synth? Of the
synth. And the construct is biological, what I call warm and wet qubits. So I'll stop there.
Wetware. Yeah, the wetware.
The wetware.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. How do you see the use of the 5G in order to destruct the genetic code or the DNA, to maybe split it or open it somehow for this other coding that they have already implemented in us? How would you see it working?
I think the four-lettered God-created double helix remains intact. It is the addition and interweaving, the interwrapping of the third strand.
Oh.
And it is the third strand that is then predominant because it is multi-layered beyond the 4 to perhaps the 10 or 12 level that they've disclosed in the most recent article. We don't know how many letters, of course, but it is a third strand that then is predominant in the human. In the synthetic life form, it is already a third strand. It is a triple-stranded helix in the synthetic life form. And then, as you'll see in the January and February issues of Entangled magazine, I go into discussing this process of a bioprinter producing not just organs and skeletal and circulatory, but the 3D bioprinter actually printing the synthetic life form.
Right. No, I've read that one, and
okay.
I think you're absolutely right. But the 5G, I know that it's going to, through the nanobots inside of us, it's going to be able to control, for that slavery factor that you were talking about, to control and move us toward being happy campers regarding whatever we have to do, and with very little free will being allowed, though it will all appear to be free will, that you really do want that brand over this brand, and you really do want whatever.
Right.
That it can also be used to control our moods. It can be used for crowd control. And I always go back to the Ferguson, Missouri terrible thing that happened, where the crowd shifted almost on a dime
Yep.
From really studying what had happened, and yes, finding the policeman to be culpable and the racism coming up and all that. But then suddenly there was a point when, whoa, it just went bananas. So the 5G primarily used for mind control, and for the DNA, it will respond to the third strand.
Right. It actually triggers the dormant DNA to replicate into a third strand, and then as the control mechanism, just as you said about Morgellons, as antennas and broadcast. So an antenna can be a receiver and a transmitter, as you know.
Right.
Take the Morgellons and apply that, overlay that into the discussion of the third strand, how it functions.
Yeah, and how DNA, anyway, right now, the normal DNA is an antenna system.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
To kind of flesh out, and I'm using that on purpose, to flesh out the discussion of what will the human 2.0 be doing. The summation, as I said, is a surf class, and it literally is, when we talk about the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, we can look at the problem in the context of discussing vaccines and vaccination and, you know, the setting forth of some horrible pandemic in which people will demand the vaccination, demand the cure. So that was the scenario I put out in 2013. But the same type of mentality in which people will say, I demand the mark of the beast. We can look at blockchain, we can look at cryptocurrencies as the tantalizing carrot to then build out the infrastructure when you couldn't force people to do it. And
right.
Now you move into what I presented yesterday in the live stream, the entire healthcare system residing in the blockchain, and people demanding access not only to their perceived wealth, but now access to not just their health records, which is the tip of the spear of all of your information, everything about you being contained within, right. quote, a healthcare record as the tip. But in fact, you now have all of your information embedded, so that in scripture, as you know, it says no man will be able to buy or sell. Well, literally, they will demand access to their information for that purpose. That's the deception. But you no longer have a demand in a third strand scenario. You now have people that are completely controlled, and that is the solution. We are being programmed, we're being taught, for the sake of convenience, we take on technology to solve problems, perceived problems, manufactured problems. So from the convenience mindset of the average person, what I call the Joe Bag of Donuts, they will demand solutions to these perceived inconveniences that are all contrived, that are all set up. And therefore, the problem in this Hegelian is that for the sake of convenience, the problem solving to all the world's ills, people will demand those solutions, and they will say that the scenario put forth is, if you want all of your problems to go away, just take the mark. Just say yes. Well, that's the massive convenience scenario.
Yes, convenience is it, for the American anyway.
It is. And so now when you're transformed and you lose this awareness of any transformation having been taken place, you view the world as being completely convenient to you, your utopia. And you know that in the political world, the agenda, whether you want to call fascism, socialism, communism, whatever, each of the isms puts forth their model of utopia for which the masses will flock to. And so this is what is being set forth in this mark of the beast scenario, is this absolute, through technology, absolute utopia. And now these people wake up with the third strand activation, and as far as they're concerned, they're in utopia.
So will the activation, in your mind, occur in swaths? I would think so. I would think they do as they have done, where they run a controlled experiment, sort of like Jade Helm was for AI, AI run battle models.
Right.
That they would do a swath somewhere and see how it goes, and then work out a few kinks, and then maybe create some false flag event that required whatever, and then suddenly, whew, it's an entire city. I would think the cities would be the first place to do it because it's such a controlled smart grid environment. Does that make sense?
It is, and the mentality of those that are trapped in the urban environment is already a collective mentality.
Yes.
And therefore they're ripe for this. And I think that if we were to look back to the Gulf War and the voice-to-skull technology that was employed on the Iraqi troops, who then in mass were surrendering,
right,
because they hear the voice of God instructing them to, that kind of swath scenario, I would agree. Because if you set up, again, the fear-based reaction, if you, for example, let's say, take one portion of the world, and there's a catastrophic event going on there in terms of the minds of people being affected. And you put that out, much like in the pandemic scenario, if you put that out and say, there is a mass outbreak of zombie apocalypse, they've programmed us for this.
Yeah, they have pre-programmed us.
Exactly. In a particular fixed area, let's say one continent. I don't want to pick on any particular continent, but let's just say an outbreak in a continent, because it can be confined. Then the rest of the world is observing this and they're demanding a solution.
Yes, yes, because they control all the media. I mean, the media have handed our reality to what I call the global elite on a silver platter. It's just incredible because they can use the media to resonate the fact again and again. It's kind of like the towers falling over and over and over again on the TV. Right. John Kennedy's wife crawling across the trunk to get his brain over and over, and the traumatizing. I mean, this is CIA technique.
This total MK Ultra.
Yes, this is MK Ultra, and it is how they have formed the masses to be pre-programmed. I mean, it's amazing to me. All the movies now, almost. Well, I don't know about the comedy ones and that sort of thing, but the major ones seem to all be pre-programming us for apocalypse.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
The dystopian future.
Yes. Yes, that they are creating with our help. So I wanted to check my notes here that I took from your site yesterday to see if I've missed something. I mean, I love the term digital biology. Thank you for that.
And that we're moving graphic up for that you had requested, and that was the
because I would like you to go over that. Sure. Moving molecular biology to bioengineering with computer-aided design programs, the bioengineering business model. Yeah, I mean, this is, this was my second major in college, undergrad, and I'm having to resurrect it after years and years of dormancy, and I'm not even going to be able to use that much because it's all different now.
Right,
it's
true.
Molecular. It's not molecular anymore.
No. Right? And it's a good point you bring up, because you mentioned early on, you were talking about at the quantum level in discussing DNA.
Yes.
And absolutely. I am convinced, looking at the different scientific disciplines that are all focused in on DNA, and you look at the papers in different disciplines, and you look at the hardware, you look at the software, you look at the machinery that is being applied from these different directions in science toward DNA, and you begin to see that they absolutely have the ability at the fundamental particle level. We're talking protons, electrons, the nucleus, and perhaps even separating the nucleus down into those particles like quarks and leptons and muons. But I don't think it needs to go to that depth of entering into the nucleus. I think at the electron, proton, nucleus level, they are able to take those fundamental particles, because as you know from chemistry, it's the affinity of bonding of electrons, the covalent bonding,
Yes.
that results in and you were talking about the quantum level of manipulation of the elements in the periodic table.
Yes.
Absolutely, that's where the DNA reconstruction, the reconfiguration is taking place, is at the fundamental particle level.
Yes, and it always makes me think, because remember, my education back east was a classical education. I mean, I studied Plato. I mean, how many colleges study Plato now? But
Sure.
Plato's forms are really about this. They're usurping the place of the divine form that the human has always had, with, what did you call them? Computer-aided design programs. I mean, you know, they're shifting us into a virtual being.
Yes.
And that's in preparation, I would assume you would say, for the third strand.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So can we now go over that diagram that you've got up of how they use DNA? I mean, a lot of people just think that DNA is in the physical organic body, and they're messing with that, but they're using DNA for all sorts of things.
Well, absolutely. DNA is being used for what you would call neuromorphic computing. So actual biological computing utilizing DNA. And most people get focused and hung up on the storage capacity of digital information within DNA. And it is not just the storage, but it is also the processing of that information. Because there is a processing that takes place in DNA, but DNA transmits the information to the neurons and through the synapse connections of the neurons. And it is down within the microtubules and the binary pairs of dimers that are 0 and 1 dimers. That is where information processing takes place in the mind, is between the literal digital pairs, binary pairs of 0 and 1 dimers. They're biological bits and bytes, and more accurately, the binary qubits, quantum bits. Again, going below, we're down to the fundamental particles when we're talking about how does information process within the human brain. It's at the quantum level of qubits, and this is what has been copied. This is what has been counterfeited in the discussion of D-wave quantum computers.
Yes, and regarding the Platonic forms, it's when you talk or I read about quantum, I am aware that below those protons, those elementary floor, there's another basement, which is in a way a parallel dimension in which our thoughts live, in which some parts of us that are not quantifiable and not measurable really, like consciousness, live. And that's the level that I feel, you know, I get a feeling when I think about that, Tony. Mm-hmm. I get a feeling that that's where the real assault is coming.
And that takes us to CERN.
Yes, and I don't want to miss that. So come on, give with the goods. I heard that CERN is shut down for a while.
Yeah, December 3rd of last year, they shut down. They're going to swap out the magnets, put in bigger, more powerful ones. But there's a whole host of equipment that's being swapped out. But it's the detectors. There is the Atlas detector, the Alice detector, the CMS detector, and the LHCb. So those are the four primary, and they're multi-stories. They weigh multiple tons. They're 3 stories tall in caverns 300 feet below ground. So those, and this is what most people miss when they're talking about the LHC, and it ties into what you're talking about spirit and soul, fundamental particles, the spirit level of the atomic structure.
Yes, yes.
So what Kathleen and I have talked about in relation to CERN, LHC, and the 4 main detectors is that the detectors, because if you reverse engineer the components of those detectors, they are built on a large scale exactly the same way as an MRI machine in a hospital.
Yes.
So when you reverse engineer this, the detectors are not just picking up the energy signature from the collision of particles, the luminosity that they speak of, moving
Right.
to a high luminosity LHC in 2026. What we're looking at is not just the energy signature quantified in electron volts. We are looking at the spiritual signature of fundamental particles below the level of quarks. We're going from the nucleus comprised of quarks, leptons and muons to now well over 1,000 new fundamental particle discoveries that they call new physics with the existing machine. So when you get down to the lower basement level, as you're talking, of the atomic structure, we're now getting down to what they're seeking, and that is what they're seeking with the detectors, are the spiritual energies coming through from other parallel dimensions, as they define it, as they view it as parallel dimensions. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and that's my intuition, is that that's the place, and that's what CERN is about primarily.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is a discussion that you and I are having right now and sharing with our patrons here that is not occurring anywhere else, as far as I can tell. I don't.
What do you mean, like other countries, or what? You mean this discussion?
Discussion.
Oh, no. No, I mean, when I think that my second book, Under an Ionized Sky, is the only book out, the only book looking at the space fence, I'm just in awe. I just can't believe it.
Exactly. And it's, again, you're echoing the conversation that Kathleen and I have is, do you think anybody else is talking about the things that we're talking about, sitting in our living room having a conversation? I'm echoing with you what I have had in conversation with Kathleen.
Yeah.
Is anybody else seeing this? Is anybody else? Are we crazy? Are we delusional? But you call it intuition. I call it the sharing through the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The book of Daniel, we talk about a lot, has been opened, and those that are seeking are being provided the information according to what God wants an individual person to know, to be aware of, because we all have different skill sets, we're all different people, what it is he wants to share, and in what quantities, and according to his timetable of his plan, things are being revealed to us. So when you look at yourself individually, objectively, and you go, why am I seeing these things? Why am I the only one? Why is my book the only book talking about it? It's because you are being shown through that opening. You are being shown what you are seeking and what the Creator, what God wants to share with you. And you therefore may be the only person on the planet within a specific viewpoint, in a specific realm of seeking of specific information. You may be the only person that information's been shared with.
Yes, no, I do. When I look back, everything is driving me toward this, what I'm doing now. And then, Tony, remember, and this is kind of facetious, but my initials are EMF. I mean, what can you do when your initials are EMF?
That's right. That's
You're going to
right.
have to study it.
Well, what can I do when my first two names are saints, Anthony and James?
I know.
There's the halo.
You're all set up.
Yeah.
So, Tony, it's been 2 hours. Is that it?
We can go longer. I mean, the group will stay with us pretty much as long as we're here. I've done 3 hours.
Oh my gosh, no, I can't do that.
No, it's up to you. You're the guest. But I know we wanted to cover real quickly the encoding of data in DNA.
It's yes, and to catch up on CERN to just get me on the page because I wanted to hear that it was a real shutdown. I wasn't sure it was real. All right.
It is a real shutdown. They are swapping out equipment.
Okay, got it. Okay.
But
this has been fantastic. And, it's so rare I can talk to someone who is so knowledgeable. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I feel like I live in a kindergarten, I won't even disparage a kindergarten. There is just such a torpor in the place I live, and people can't think anymore. They can't think. They can't read. They can't dialogue. It's all name calling and emotionalism, and I don't know what's happened to people, but I'm pretty much alone all the time now.
Well, I'll tell you, if it were not for two groups, one group has a single occupant. That's my wife, Kathleen.
Yes.
The second group are my patrons.
Yes.
And if it were not for those two groups,
yes,
I wouldn't have anyone to talk to.
Yes, that's so wonderful you have that. I mean, I think of that fellowship factor, and I keep wanting to move from this place, but and I don't quite know how to make it happen. And I have to do this book. I mean, I'm swimming in paper right now. I'm at that point. But this is going to be a real blockbuster. And this is my last book on the whole topic. I'll be done when I'm done with this. So I'll be calling on you through this.
Oh, yeah.
For some clarification.
What's the name of your book going to be? I put it up earlier.
I have no idea. It's definitely going to have synthetic biology in the title.
Synthetic biology, and will it include transhumanism in the title?
Yes, it'll have those two terms in it.
Okay.
I'm going to give myself a lot more liberty in this book than I did the last two. The last two are just footnote heavy, without that much commentary by me. Just segueing here and that. This is different. I'm going to. People are going to hear from me because this is a real burden on my heart, this whole thing.
Well, they want to hear your voice.
Yes.
Because and my voice, you are unique in what you're presenting. And as soon as you are ready to put up something that is promotional, whether it's a graphic or a video, I will post it on my homepage. I will send it to all of my patrons and ask them and encourage them to pass it on to others. And as soon as you have a draft manuscript that you feel you want to share with me, I'll definitely dedicate my time to reading it and giving comment. But
thank you so much, Tony.
In the development of that, I'm happy to collaborate with you in the development.
And I really appreciate your spirituality, yours and Kathleen's and your patrons. I don't talk about my spirituality because it's very private and is what I lean on very heavily. But you will definitely be in this book, Tony, and it will it'll be about the spiritual, because this is going to have the spiritual in it, and it'll be about, of course, CERN and DNA. So I'm so glad to count you a friend. No,
it's been a pleasure conversing with you over the years. And, the thing that Kathleen always likes to say about what we're doing is that we are studying the spiritual side. We're examining the spiritual side of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
And the phrase I put out there often is you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical and vice versa.
Exactly. Metaphysics and physics, they're the same word, just with, and the curtain between them, the veil, as it has been called in various ancient spiritual documents, the veil has been rent, and and we are now at war, as it is being really, things are coming through in droves, and it's time for us to really, that armor you're talking about. I absolutely have that armor, and am so thrilled that I have so much help coming from all quarters, including you.
It's essential, because really the only antidote is our spiritual relationship.
Yes.
And one of my other silly, trite things that I've said over the last couple of years is based on quantum mechanics. And people have asked me, in terms of physics, what is prayer? And so I like to just sort of tongue-in-cheek say, well, we're quantum entangled with Jesus Christ. Okay?
That's good.
But
that's really good.
Kathleen is texting me and asking me, and of course she's expressing her thanks to you as well. And she's very much in alignment with the things that you teach.
Yes.
And she appreciates you as a teacher. And that's really our role. We're not here for our own ego, you and I.
Right.
We are here as teachers, and teachers must always be humble first, and always be a servant to the students, because we serve them.
Yes. Actually, being a servant is a higher role now in this era than being a master. That's what the global elites don't know.
And that will be their downfall.
That will be their downfall. So be it. Absolutely. All right, Tony. Mwah. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless. We'll stay entangled.
Okay, we'll stay entangled.
All righty. Bye-bye, and thank you. All right, my friends. I think you can still hear me. Okay, can you guys still hear me? I've disconnected the Skype with, I think you can still hear me. All right, just wanted to say thank you as an audience for participating in the conversation with Elana. I hope I answered your questions. I didn't really set aside time for your questions today, and I apologize. Feel free to email me any questions you may have, and I will make sure that Elana receives those and sends answers directly back to you. We'll try to do more interviews with Elana, but also if you have some other guests in keeping with the level of quality that Elana brought to our conversation today, please suggest those, and I will make contact with those that you feel that we should have a conversation with in forthcoming live streams. And those can happen on a Sunday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday if you need to pass along a schedule of sorts to anyone you might recommend for these live stream conversations. I thoroughly enjoyed it today. As Elana said, it is very rare that she or I or Kathleen have the opportunity to really have a spiritual and a intellectual conversation like this. I hope you appreciate the fact that Elana does not do a lot of interviews. She asked to come on. I did not invite her. She asked to come on and speak to you as patrons. And of course I felt absolutely just pleased that she would even ask to come on. So really, she is an extraordinary researcher who is very busy in her research. As you know, she's trying to finish this third book as well. And for her to carve out 2 hours is really difficult. But she wanted to do that for you as patrons. And you know, she has been on a few of the shows that you guys have heard. She was on with Kev Baker earlier this week, which is great. Kev is still a good friend of mine. But again, it's very seldom that she does speak in public. And to be able to have this level of conversation where she's allowed to express herself without being interrupted too often and without having commercial interruptions certainly is a benefit. But she does appreciate the fact that we can have an intelligent, peer-level conversation, and that's unusual for her. Most of the time, the interviews are conducted by someone who doesn't have a research background. And so I hope you appreciate the peer-to-peer level of conversation that she and I have. I will be collaborating with her on her book. I've already done so, and I will continue to do so because I appreciate the perspective and direction that she takes, and also that she's hitting on so many areas that you've heard me research about, that it gives me another voice to get that information out to another audience, which is so important because we are teachers. So if you have any questions in the chat room, go ahead and put the questions up. I'll try to answer them on behalf of Elana, knowing her background, and also from my own information. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them up in the chat room right now. We'll take a few minutes to do that. I'm watching the chat room, and I see things are just screaming through here. You guys look like you had a good time. I thank you for all of your prayers and your blessings. Thank you very much on behalf of Kathleen and myself. You can go to elanafreeland.com. Just type in elanafreeland.com, and her books are available there. They're also available through Amazon, but if you buy them directly through her, then she gets a little bit more of a benefit from that. Let's see. Yes, Anthony, will 5G go satellite? Andy Parton is asking. Yes. If you type in Elon Musk 5G satellites, you will see that Elon Musk, along with a couple of other companies, are launching, already have begun launching, and will continue for another 18 months, deploying, and in their disclosure, in their numbers, 20,000 satellites. If you look at the January issue of Entangled Magazine, I cover this, that they are deploying satellites, very small satellites, that have what are known as phased array antennas on them. And the phased array means that these individual antennas on an individual satellite, those antennas can be manipulated, they can be steered, they can be focused so that the 5G signal pinpoints a spot on the Earth as small as 1 foot in diameter. Phased array, pinpoint. This is the same thing that is used in active denial millimeter wave and microwave systems for crowd control. Active denial systems use phased array. Phased array are also used in missile defense systems like the Patriot missile system and the Iron Dome missile system in Israel. So phased array satellites are being deployed as we speak, already have deployed many of them, but up to 20,000, all 5G phased array transmitting satellite sites. Okay? So let's see what else you have for questions. Kathy asks, Anthony, what would you guess it will look like, the distinction, for those who have a relationship with Jesus as far as those, as these with the demonic influences with technology? Well, the answer, Kathy, is found in Scripture. The mark of the beast is on the forehead or on the back of forehead or on the hand. The seal of God is on the forehead of those that do not take the mark of the beast. They receive the seal of God on their forehead. Now, if you want to bring in the scenario of the rapture, it is those that are left behind post-rapture that then have the seal of God on their forehead because they've made the conscious decision, the free will decision, to not take the mark of the beast. So there's a mark of the beast, which is the counterfeit. Again, Satan's always counterfeiting the systems of God. The mark of the beast is the counterfeit to the visible seal on the forehead of those that are saved through God, through Jesus Christ. So whether you want to consider and include the discussion of the rapture in that or not is by your choice, by your interpretation, by your belief system. But as I view it, it is a post-rapture situation when those that turn to God for salvation and deny Satan and his beast system that then are sealed on the forehead. Okay? All right, let's see what else we have for questions. I want to scroll back up here again. Anthony, this is a question from Mitch. Anthony, do you think that the Black Knight belongs to Elon Musk or Geordie Rose, the Black Knight? Are you talking about the Black Knight in terms of a satellite? Clarify that for me, Midge, if you would. The Black Knight being a satellite? Is that what you mean? If so, that would be a Black Knight satellite that belongs to Elon Musk. Geordie Rose, as far as I know, is not involved in any of the satellite system development or deployment. Healthcare says, would you please do a show with Marfugal News and Troy from Healthcare Sucks? Oh, that's from Troy. With Marfugal. Have them email me, okay, Healthcare. I'll do a show if it's appropriate, but I need to take a look at and vet Marfugal News first before I make any commitment on that. But go ahead and email me the information, and then I can take a look at some of these. Okay? Humble Power says, I would like to hear you take on the Noahide laws and their purpose. Okay, Humble Power, if you will go back 2 Sundays, okay? Not the Sunday live stream I just did with Kathleen, but the Sunday live stream before that is in the archives, in the patrons area, on my website. Kathleen and I spent 3 hours on the Noahide laws. That's 2 Sunday live streams ago, okay? All righty. Okay, Dawn's Awakening. If you have an infirmity that if you don't use man's medicine, you die, would you stop taking it? I am saved by the blood of Jesus. I would say that any medication, any medication or medical procedure that you feel led to utilize, to employ, feel led through the Holy Spirit, preface all decisions with prayer. Preface all decisions with prayer. Then follow the leading of the Lord as to whether to take a medication or undergo a medical procedure. That's the best advice that I can offer. That's a pretty blanket, far-reaching question. That's the process that Kathleen and I use when we are making a decision as to whether or not to undergo a medical procedure, seek medical care, or take a medication or a supplement, is follow the leading of the Lord through prayer, okay? To deny yourself or a loved one something that will prevent someone from dying, that's a personal decision. I can't advise on that. That's a dangerous place for me to tread. Okay, so that's a personal decision. Let's see what we have here. Stuff is going by pretty quick in the chat room. Let me back up a little bit. Okay. NYS TV. Dawn Smith, please email me about NYS TV, and I will take a look at it. Crescent asks if I've ever talked between Jonathan Kleck and myself, if we've had a conversation. I offered to Jonathan by way of an email to do a show together, and he asked me what would it be about, and I responded to that, but I've not heard from Jonathan since reaching out and asking if he would like to have a conversation on a live stream. But again, Crescent, go ahead and send me an email about Jonathan Kleck, and I will respond by email on that. Let's see. Okay, Midge, Andy is asking you, Midge, do you mean the mystery object that's been photographed? See, the Black Knight, I believe, is a satellite that you're referring to, a pyramid-shaped satellite. That would not be something that Elon Musk would publicly disclose, and it's not something of Geordie Rose. If there is a black pyramid satellite in orbit, if that's real, if that's factual, then that would be something that was put up there by the intelligence communities. Okay, so, I mean, I don't have any knowledge on that. It's not something I've really explored, so I can't answer that question. Let's see. Just, again, looking at what you guys here talking about in the chat room. Let's see what we have. Okay, so Humble Power would like my take on the Noahide laws and their purpose. Please listen to the 3-hour live stream. I mean, we say it at the beginning. We're pretty clear right in the beginning. You don't have to listen to the whole live stream to know our position on it. But in a nutshell, it's extremely dangerous, okay, especially to Christians. Again, you can email me and I'll give you a thumbnail sketch on my position on the Noahide laws, but it's a threat to Christians. And it is something that is rising to the forefront and is being pushed. And this is coming from the Kabbalistic Jew perspective, from the Sanhedrin perspective, okay? Let's see what we have here. Question from Paul. Sorry, it's jumping around here, so let me see. From Paul, Anthony, what do you think of Planet X? NASA in the 80s talked about it when it was hush-hush. Do you think it could be wormwood? Yes, I do think that Planet X is the same as wormwood, and therefore, as it plays out in Revelation, is where the discussion of Planet X is relevant. But again, this is further down the timeline of the tribulation. Planet X, in my estimation, is not something that is having a physical effect upon the Earth yet. We would see dramatic tectonic effects and orbital effects upon the Earth already. The orbit of the planet, the rotation of the planet, the alignment of the poles, all of those things would be dramatically undergoing changes due to the close proximity of wormwood. I do not think that wormwood, or Planet X if you want to call it that, has entered into our solar system yet. That is a tribulation, perhaps the Great Tribulation, the later 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation. And speaking of that, now there's some discussion as to whether the tribulation is actually 7 years, or perhaps that we may have entered into already the first 3.5-year time period, somewhere in that first half of the tribulation. If it is 7 years, that perhaps we're already in it. I don't know. I think there's a 7-year tribulation. That's my perspective at this point. And the latter half, the latter 3.5, is the Great Tribulation, and that's where I think that more of these factors such as wormwood begin to take place, and that is where I see the opening of the abyss to fall into that 3.5-year Great Tribulation time frame. Okay? Let's see what else you have. All right, yeah, Midge, I see you're having some trouble in the chat room. Plower, question, is 5G all bad for health, or could there also be a positive side effects from 5G? No. 5G is absolutely a weapons system. The only positive would be the communications that we're experiencing. I have a 5G Wi-Fi router. I have my computer actually connected by Ethernet to my 5G router here in the home right now. So there's a positive. We're able to communicate. But beyond that, it is intended as a weapons system. There's no positive health applications of 5G. Alrighty. Okay, boy, a lot of questions in here. Let me back up the chat room so I can capture these. Okay, Jonathan asks, Anthony, what is your opinion about the topic UFO disclosure? Do you feel it is something that will happen soon? Yes, the UFO disclosure is a psychological operation. It will be used at the time of the rapture to explain the sudden disappearance of people in the rapture. The UFO disclosure is the whole discussion that I had in my very first book. In the early chapters of Covert Catastrophe, I describe the false arrival, the holographic projection of UFOs, and the return of what is described as our benevolent ancestors from the stars returning. That's the opening of Covert Catastrophe. So the UFO disclosure is a psychological operation to explain away the sudden disappearance of those that are saved, those that are believers, those that have been saved through the blood of Jesus Christ, who are suddenly snatched out. And the explanation is the UFOs took them. The scenario is that UFOs are real. Our benevolent ancestors from the stars have returned to save mankind, to bring about the one world religion, the one world leader. All of this ties into the UFO disclosure as solving the world's problems. Okay? This is tied in with this whole Antichrist, this whole image of the first beast. The UFOs is simply those manifestations of the demonic realm, the spiritual manifesting as the physical. Yes, insofar as craft. There are craft in the secret space program that Elana was making reference to. There are man-made UFOs in a secret space program scenario, but the majority of the UFOs are spiritual manifestations as spirits, but also in the physical in terms of craft. Because remember, demons can morph into any configuration, even the configuration that appears as a spacecraft, as a UFO. That is a spiritual entity that has morphed itself into a physical form. So it's not just a humanoid form, but it can also be a form that one would describe as a UFO. Okay? So this is purely from the demonic realm. These are not spacecraft coming from other star systems. These are interdimensional beings that are manifesting themselves in our dimension, be they in a form like a little gray or in the form of a physical craft. That is still a demonic entity. Okay? All right, let me scroll back up through the chat room. I know that these keep coming in as I'm answering, so let me back up a little bit. Okay. Question from Spirit is, Anthony, what do you think about AI and time travel? Perhaps accurate prophecies were derived through technology, as well as by some form of spiritual means. Imagine what this could mean if AI could. Okay, so in a nutshell, AI is developed, and there's multiple layers of AI in terms of sophistication and capability. But AI is developed because of information obtained from fallen angels. You have various forms of interdimensional communication, otherwise known as divination, including quantum computing, that is a sophisticated divinatory tool that performs the function of communicating with fallen angels. And what is communicated is forbidden knowledge. AI is developed because of that knowledge that is passed on through divinatory processes. AI is a mathematical system that has been provided by fallen angels. Now, AI, as it is itself, is not a spirit. It is a mechanism. But can AI, as it functions as a form of a human type of brain, a neuromorphic brain, as a counterfeit of the human brain, when I talk about AI in the form of a biological computer within a synthetic life form, that AI, coupled with the synthetic life form, is then indwelt. That is a host body. AI functioning as a biological brain, biological in that it has been programmed using the algorithms of software mathematics. That biological brain is then programmed to then operate as a warm and wet biological quantum computer housed within a synthetic life form. Those two together are then a host body that is then indwelt by one or more demonic spirits. That's the purpose of the synthetic life forms, is to be a host body for demonic entities to then be housed in. Okay? Anthony, what do you think about AI and time travel, as I didn't answer that portion of it? Time travel does not exist. Humans were not developed, nor are capable of time travel. Now, we see the book of Enoch. We hear about Enoch being carried up to heaven. That would be the exception. Jesus Christ, of course, would be the exception. But the rank and file human is not allowed by God, is not capable of time travel. Okay? It just physically cannot happen. Prohibited by God. Only God operates and Jesus Christ operate outside of time. Humans were never developed, were never created by God to operate outside of time. The only time that happens is after we die, or if we are raptured in spiritual form, then we exist in that spiritual form outside of time. But in human form, in mortal form, we do not have the capability to travel in time, back or forward. Can AI travel? No. No, AI is limited to what humans have constructed. AI does not have the ability to travel to the past or to the future. It is fixed, much like a mortal human is fixed in a specific time. It is only something that is constructed by man through the advent of the obtaining of knowledge from fallen angels. Okay? So it's a construct of man, and therefore is not able to move through time. All right, let's see what else we have here. Ricky says, Anthony, script says, those that came out of the Great Tribulation in Revelation. So Christians are going to be in the Great Tribulation and then we come out. There's no rapture. Well, that's an interpretation. I respect that. I respect that. It's not a problem. I respect other people's interpretations. I'm not one to know the mind of God. Only God can answer that. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so Ricky Holloway says AI can write code humans cannot understand, more efficient, and we lose control. Yes, the self-learning, the recursive neural network, the autoencoder system of AI in which it is self-learning, the autoencoder provides AI the ability to computationally exceed the computational abilities of the human mind. But that does not mean that AI has the capability to do everything that a human mind can do. AI does not have the creativity. It does not have the spiritual. It does not have the soul of a human. Okay? AI can be indwelt by a demonic spirit, but it cannot have the same spirit that a human has. AI, Geordie Rose says, will do everything better than a human can do. Well, that's computationally. That's mathematically. That's information processing. Certainly, that's already been demonstrated by higher levels of AI to computationally arrive at a solution much more quickly than a human can. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is equivalent in all respects to a human mind. Okay? All right, let's see what we have here. Interesting. You guys are you've really saved up your questions for today to hit me. That's okay. That's good. Midge, you're asking, Anthony, do you know how these aliens, demons tie in with the Antichrist? Yes, the Antichrist spirit is demonic in itself, and the lower hierarchies, those that serve Satan, the hierarchical structure of the fallen angels, the third of the angels that fell from heaven, they serve Satan. They serve the Antichrist spirit, which is the spirit of Satan. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Aliens and demons tie in with the Antichrist because they are of the same spirit. Okay? And let's see. Just looking at your comments in the chat room. Okay. Question from Andy. Anthony, if DNA determines the physical form of us, how will a third strand change the physical form? Very good. Yeah, we didn't get a chance to address that. Physically, outwardly, the only change that I anticipate is the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast on the forehead or the hand is the outward manifestation of the third strand of DNA having undergone this process of replication. The replication produces that mark. Okay? The other manifestation is during the 5-month period of immortality. Now that sounds like an oxymoron, a 5-month period of immortality. Remember in Revelation it says that they will seek death, but will not find it for 5 months. And during that 5-month period, the sores break out across the body. So they take the mark of the beast, then sores begin to manifest all over the body. And they are tormented for 5 months, seeking death, but cannot find it. That's a 5-month period of immortality. That's the outward manifestation of the third strand of DNA. Much like the Morgellons disease is an outward manifestation of that disease, that is exacerbated many times over with the advent of the replication of the third strand of DNA. So that will be the outward sign along with the mark of the beast. Okay? Let's see what else. Amber asks, what are your thoughts on this reptilian thing? Well, the reptilian, I think you have to define the reptilian much more carefully, and it is the serpent seed. It is the vipers. Remember, in Scripture, in the temple, Jesus Christ calls out the Pharisees and the Sadducees as being the offspring, the children, the sons of vipers. So reptilian is really vipers. I think that, there's that whole discussion presented out there about the reptilian race. We should be more careful and focus that in on the DNA, the seed of Satan, when we talk about reptilian. So therefore, the seed of Satan, which is the vipers that Jesus Christ describes, is the more accurate way to say that. And so the answer is, there is a strain of DNA of those vipers. The reptilian, if you want to call it, strand of DNA is valid. That is a valid strain. That is a strain of DNA. That is a family tree. That is a lineage of vipers that has carried on since the time of Noah. It was not eliminated in the flood. It continued on to today. And that's where you also see the discussion of the Nephilim, the Anunnaki. That bloodline continues today and is manifesting. And therefore, like the days of Noah that we're in again today, that bloodline, that viper, that pit of vipers, continues today. We have Pharisees and Sadducees today, literally. We see the Sanhedrin and the Noahide laws. All of that factors into that bloodline. And because we're in the days of Noah, God will eliminate once and for all. That's why the lake of fire is there. It's not just for Satan, the lake of fire, but it is all his demons and that bloodline of viper blood, the seed of Satan, all those humans that don't seek Jesus Christ, that don't seek salvation, that don't seek the face of God, will also be cast into the lake of fire after the conclusion of the millennial reign. So that bloodline will biologically be burned, along with all the elements. Okay, let's see. Boy, you guys really are taking your opportunity with questions. Now, that's okay. That's all right. WC asked the question, Anthony, what are your thoughts on reincarnation that some believe in? He says, I don't. Yeah, reincarnation is not biblical. Reincarnation is not something that I feel is a biblical concept. That is for the dark arts, the mystical societies, the mystery societies, the New Agers. If you want to put it in this term, I don't believe in reincarnation. Now, if you believe that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a form of reincarnation, so be it. I don't call it reincarnation. I call the resurrection of Jesus Christ the resurrection. Okay? Plain and simple. But for humans to be reincarnated, no, I don't think it's biblical. Alrighty. WC also is asking, what creates that belief that they lived before? Well, that's a good question. The belief that they lived before, that they reincarnated, and it gets into the discussion of DNA and whether there are memories that are embedded in our DNA, generational memories. Well, I think the way to answer that is, do you recognize the traits of your ancestors within yourself? Do you speak and behave? Do you have mannerisms that you recognize in a grandparent? Or if you have a great-grandparent, you might recognize behavioral traits that are very similar or even identical to a great-grandparent that's still alive. So generational behavior traits we can prove. Can we prove generational memories in our DNA? Possibly. I would go there. But does that mean that you're recalling past life experiences in the context of talking about reincarnation? I don't think so. I don't think we're reliving a past life as people who go through regression in hypnosis and somehow are reliving a past life experienced during hypnosis. I think that's pushing the envelope a little bit. But I do think that we have generational memories embedded in our DNA. Because our DNA is something that is passed on from generation to generation, there's information embedded in the DNA that is likewise passed on from generation to generation. Not just the biological pattern, but information embedded in that. And I'm addressing that in the March issue of Entangled Magazine. The March issue of Entangled Magazine is entitled Information. So, very germane question to the magazine. Okay? All right. Again, let me scroll down through this a little bit. Dawn is asking, do you believe we have gone or will go through a time loop? No. No, I don't think so. Again, it relates to my answer to time travel. I don't think that we have gone through a time loop, and that may be relevant in terms of the discussion of CERN and the LHC. I don't think that time has been distorted and therefore creating a loop, or that we are going through a change in the timeline. That's not happening. I don't think the Mandela effect is a change in the timeline, to put one touch point on it. But as I said in yesterday's live stream, history repeats itself. Therefore, we are in a cycle. There is a loop to time in the linear progression of human existence. We live in a linear measurement of time as it progresses. But within that linear progression, there is a repetition of history. There's a repetition because people repeat their mistakes and they repeat their solutions. So when we talk about repeating history, we're talking about behavior traits that continue through that linear progression of the human race. And in our measurement of time being linear, it has a past and a future linear. God operating outside of time has a loop of the alpha and the omega. There is not a definitive starting and end point. There is, in God's time, a loop. It is an endless circle. It is beyond our ability with a human brain to understand what there was before the beginning of the universe, when God spoke everything into existence, when God said, let there be light. That's a starting point. So the question is, well, what existed before that? Well, that takes the mind of God to define and to answer that question. What was there before everything came into being that we experience as a human? That's in God's timeline. He is the I am. God has always been there. We can't understand that from a human mind perspective. We need to know the mind of God to answer that question. But there is a loop to it, in the sense of defining the loop, using that to define the outside of linear time that God exists in and that Jesus Christ exists in. We can call it as best we can as a human to describe that out of time as a loop, that it never ends. It is an infinite loop. It is a circle that continues to always be moving. Okay? All right, what else do we have? Okay, so Midge is asking, how will they present themselves? The Antichrist will find, sorry, the chat room's jumping. Where is it? Sorry, the postings are making the chat room jump around a little bit. How will they present themselves? The Antichrist will find a fake peace treaty, but how does the fake alien agenda work with the Antichrist? Oh, good question. Okay, that comes from Midge. The fake alien agenda and the Antichrist is the Antichrist presenting this holographic false rapture. Okay? They're going to disclose the existence of UFOs through holographic projections. This is the whole Project Bluebeam discussion, but it's much more advanced than Project Bluebeam, but that's your touch point if you haven't heard of that. The Antichrist, in so far as the image of the first beast, the image of the first beast is performing signs and wonders, perceived as miracles. That's part of that false disclosure and holographic projections of UFOs. And the synthetic life forms that will be presented as our benevolent ancestors returning from the stars. The whole panspermia discussion is a subset of that as well. Okay? So it is the first beast that is performing signs and wonders that include the discussion of this UFO alien disclosure. All right. Can you talk about the erratic magnetosphere? Susan is asking that question. Yes, the magnetosphere is erratic. The progression of the poles, northern pole in particular towards Siberia, but the southern pole is migrating as well. This is a phenomenon of the liquid iron core that is rotating. It spins just like the planet spins. The movement of that, the orbiting, the rotation, I should say, the rotation of the core, just like a gyroscope, if it begins to slow its rotation, will begin to tilt to one side, just like a gyroscope will begin to tilt to one side as it begins to slow in its rotation. And because it tilts, the magnetosphere, the magnetic lines of force, the magnetosphere and magnetopause of the Earth itself, just like if you imagined one that was produced in a gyroscope with a north and south pole on the gyroscope, as the gyroscope tilts, just like the planet tilts, because the core is tilting, those magnetosphere lines begin to tilt as well. They begin to migrate towards the tilt of the planet that is reflective of the tilt of the liquid iron core. So we see the migration of the poles because of this tilt. And that changes the shape, that changes the morphology, changes the shape of the magnetosphere. Now, you've heard me discuss the magnets at CERN and the effects of CERN and the effects of the synchrotron energies of gamma rays and X-rays and the magnetic lines of force of the magnets themselves having an effect on the magnetosphere, and that will cause a distortion. But most of the distortion is occurring because of the distortion to the liquid iron core because of the advent of strangelets produced by the LHC and the RHIC at Brookhaven. Strangelets exist in the core of the planet and having its effect. I refer you to all of my discussions in Entangled magazine about strangelets. Okay, that's a very long topic to present today. But the magnetosphere is being affected by the change in the rotational speed and the tilt of the liquid iron core. Okay? Alrighty. Okay. One last question. Midge, okay, I see what you're saying. All right. Okay, so we're up to 3 hours and I'm losing my voice here. I think that'll conclude for questions for today. Feel free, as always, you can send me questions by email at anthonypatchauthor, A-U-T-H-O-R, anthonypatchauthor @gmail.com. Happy to take more questions on Sunday when we do our live stream Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Thank you very much for your participation. See, I can't talk. It's been 3 hours. Your participation today. Elana, very much enjoyed your interaction in the chat room and your welcoming of her and your appreciation for her research. So ElanaFreeland.com is where you can find her books and her research. And I'm sure we will have her back on for another live stream as time allows in her research and her production of her third book, which will be Synthetic Biology and Transhumanism. That's the working title. Certainly it will include synthetic biology in her third book. And yours truly has been invited to collaborate with her, and I will gladly do that. So thank you again. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you for your patriotism, if we want to call it that. And Kathleen thanks you as well. And we'll talk to you again on Sunday. Tomorrow, late tomorrow, it will be probably in the evening. Late tomorrow, Entangled magazine will be released. I'm bringing in some late-breaking information that's just come in yesterday and today. D-Wave included. I sent you some announcements yesterday about D-Wave's latest computer. So I'm going to add that into the March issue of Entangled magazine. And so it will be delayed a little bit. So it'll be Friday evening. Today is Thursday. Friday evening, the magazine will actually come out. So don't be dismayed if you don't receive it first thing in the morning. Okay? The live stream will be posted on YouTube. It will be public. Yesterday's live stream is going to be the Blog Talk Radio broadcast on Friday evening. Today's live stream will only be available through my YouTube channel, and it will be made public. It will take a little bit of time because Doug Diamond from Diamond Media will be enhancing the audio. He'll be improving the quality of the audio. He'll be posting some graphics as well on the YouTube version of today's live stream. So if you want to let other people know that this information, this interview with Elana is public, it's not just for the patrons, and I thank you for allowing me to make it public, even though you're the ones who are responsible for this even happening. And I thank you again for your generosity in allowing me to post some of our live streams to the general public. But it helps to bring more people to the conversation, and that helps in our educational process when we get to hear from new patrons that come into the conversation. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and God bless you all. And it's been a wonderful day. It's awesome. 3 hours today. It was great to be able to answer some of your questions following the conversation with Elana. So with that, again, I'll say thank you and God bless you, and we'll talk to you on Sunday. Bye-bye.